February 1st, 2026. 2 in the morning. A masked man appeared on the front porch of a home in Tucson's Catalina Foothills neighborhood. He was gloved, armed, his face completely covered. He disabled the doorbell camera. He opened the door. He walked inside. 41 minutes later, the pacemaker belonging to 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie stopped syncing with her iPhone. She was gone. Not dead, not found. Gone. And from that moment forward, the people who love Nancy Guthrie have been living inside a nightmare that has not ended. But tonight, there is one detail in this case that has received almost no attention. One detail that cuts through every press conference, every cleared statement, every carefully worded update from the Pima County Sheriff's Department, and exposes what is actually happening beneath the surface of this investigation. It has been 57 days since Nancy Guthrie vanished. 57 days since a judge signed a search warrant authorizing the seizure of a blue Honda CRV belonging to Annie Guthrie, Nancy's daughter, the last vehicle Nancy ever sat in before she disappeared. That car was towed away on February 3rd. It was disassembled, analyzed, processed for forensic evidence. And as of today, March 29, 2026, that car has still not been returned. 57 days. The sheriff publicly cleared the family. He said it on February 20th, he said it again on February 22nd, and again on February 25th. The Guthrie family is cleared. They are victims. Leave them alone. And yet their car, the car seized under a warrant signed by a judge, who agreed there was probable cause to believe it contained evidence of a crime, is still sitting in law enforcement custody. 57 days later, the sheriff will not explain why. And here is the question that no one in a position of authority has answered. If the family is truly cleared, why is their car still being treated as critical evidence in an active kidnapping investigation? That question does not have a simple answer. But the answer that exists is important. And tonight, we are going to find it. We are going to walk through what investigators can extract from a modern vehicle. What 57 days of retention tells us about where this investigation actually stands. What the forensic science says. What the experts who have worked hundreds of cases like this say, and why the silence around that blue Honda CRV may be the most consequential detail in the entire Nancy Guthrie case. Because in investigations, what is not said is sometimes more informative than what is. And right now, the silence has lasted 57 days. No sensationalism, no exploitation, just evidence, just analysis, just the pursuit of truth. She lived alone in the Catalina Foothills, a quiet, elevated residential area on the northeastern edge of Tucson, Arizona. The neighborhood sits above the city, surrounded by saguaro, cactus, and desert brush, private and peaceful. The kind of place people choose when they want safety and quiet. Nancy had limited mobility. She had serious medical conditions that came with age. She wore a pacemaker. She moved carefully, deliberately, and she depended on the people who loved her to check in regularly, to make sure she was okay, to make sure she was safe. She had 3 children. Savannah Guthrie, the co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, one of the most recognizable journalists in American television, a woman who has sat across from presidents, who has covered elections and disasters and the defining events of a generation. Savannah built her career in New York, thousands of miles from her mother's home in the Arizona desert. Cameron Guthrie, an F-16 fighter pilot, a man whose service took him across the country and whose career placed him far from Tucson. And Annie Guthrie, the middle child, the one who stayed. Annie married a man named Tommaso Feliciano. They built their life in Tucson, close to Nancy's home in the Catalina Foothills, while Savannah's name appeared on television screens every morning, and Cameron's service kept him moving. Annie was the one who showed up, who drove over for dinner, who called, who made sure her elderly mother was not just alive, but living. That proximity, Annie's consistent, loving presence in Nancy's daily life is the reason what happened on the night of January 31st matters so much. Because it was not a stranger who drove Nancy home that night. It was her daughter. And it was her daughter's car that police seized 2 days later. The evening of Friday, January 31st, 2026, Annie and Tommaso invited Nancy over for dinner. Nancy arrived at their home sometime in the early evening. They ate together. They talked. It was the kind of ordinary evening that families have without knowing it will one day be examined in extraordinary detail. Around 9:30 at night, dinner ended. Nancy needed to go home. Annie and Tommaso offered to drive her. They walked out to their blue Honda CRV. According to what Annie and Tommaso later told investigators, Nancy sat in the front passenger seat. Tommaso drove. Annie sat in the back. They made the short drive to Nancy's home in the Catalina Foothills. They pulled into her driveway. The garage door opened. They helped Nancy out of the car. They walked her inside. They made sure she was settled. They made sure she was safe. Then they left. That was the last time anyone who loved Nancy Guthrie saw her alive. Now here is where the case changes. Approximately 4.5 hours after Annie and Tommaso drove away, at exactly 2 in the morning on February 1st, something happened on Nancy Guthrie's front porch that no one in this neighborhood had ever seen before. A figure appeared, masked, gloved, armed, every feature of the face concealed. This was not someone who knocked on the door and waited. This was not a confused neighbor or a person who got the wrong house. This person walked directly to the doorbell camera and disabled it, then walked to the front door and opened it, then walked inside. 41 minutes passed. Then Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker, the device embedded in her chest that kept her heart beating, the device that synced with her iPhone to allow her medical team to monitor her remotely, stopped transmitting. The signal went dark. She was gone. By the time the sun rose over the Catalina foothills on February 1st, the last evidence that Nancy Guthrie was alive was a flat line on a medical monitoring screen, and the last vehicle she had ever sat in was a blue Honda CRV parked in her daughter's driveway. 2 days later, police came for that car. A tow truck pulled up to the residence where Annie and Tommaso's blue Honda CRV was parked. The driver stepped out, walked to the vehicle, attached the hook, and loaded it onto the flatbed. This was not a voluntary surrender. Annie and Tommaso did not walk outside and hand over their keys and say, "Here, take it. We want to help." This was a seizure under legal authority. This was a search warrant, and that distinction matters more than almost anything else we are going to discuss tonight. The Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution protects people from unreasonable searches and seizures. If law enforcement wants to take your car, search it, disassemble it, and hold it as evidence in a criminal investigation. They cannot simply decide to do that. They need a judge to agree. They need to write an affidavit, a document that lays out specific, articulable facts establishing probable cause, not suspicion. Not a feeling, not a hunch, but actual factual basis to believe that vehicle contains evidence of a crime. A judge reads that affidavit, evaluates it, and decides whether the facts meet the legal standard. If the judge agrees, they sign the warrant. If they do not agree, no warrant issues and the car stays where it is. Somewhere in the Pima County court system, there exists a signed warrant for Annie and Tommaso's Honda CRV. A detective wrote it, a judge read it, and the judge determined that yes, based on the facts presented, there is sufficient reason to believe that car contains evidence relevant to the kidnapping of Nancy Guthrie. That signature is not casual. Judges understand what they are authorizing when they sign a vehicle seizure warrant. They are authorizing the deprivation of someone's property, the invasion of their privacy, the physical dismantling of a vehicle that belongs to real people. That signature carries weight, and the warrant would have specified exactly what investigators were looking for. Digital data from the vehicle's computer systems, biological evidence, DNA, blood, hair, fibers, trace evidence that could establish the presence of specific individuals at specific times, any item relevant to the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Once the warrant was signed, investigators executed it. They took the car, transported it to a secure impound facility, established chain of custody, documented every person who would touch it, every test that would be run, every sample that would be extracted. Because in a case like this, chain of custody is not procedural formality. Chain of custody is the difference between evidence that holds up in court and evidence that gets thrown out. Every decision investigators make from the moment that car was seized is made with the eventual possibility of trial in mind. On March 5th, investigative journalist Chris McDana, working with the Cold Case Foundation, contacted a source inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department. He asked a direct question. Is Annie's car still in evidence? Yes. Does it have an official evidence number? Yes. Where is it currently? The source explained the vehicle was at a repair facility, being reassembled after forensic analysis. McDana pressed further. He contacted the tow company that had moved the vehicle. The company confirmed the transport, then said they were operating under a confidentiality agreement and could not provide further details. Stop there. Tow companies do not operate under confidentiality agreements for routine vehicle transport. They operate under confidentiality agreements when law enforcement specifically instructs them to keep the movement of a vehicle quiet, because that vehicle is evidence, because that evidence is active, because who moved it, when, and where it went is part of an ongoing investigation that cannot be compromised. That confidentiality agreement is not a bureaucratic formality. It is law enforcement saying, this vehicle's status is sensitive enough that we do not want it discussed publicly. 53 days after seizure, as of March 5th, Annie and Tommaso's car remained in law enforcement custody with an active evidence number, their car being reassembled at a facility under a confidentiality agreement, while the sheriff told the world their family had been cleared. As of today, March 29th, that number is 57 days, and the sheriff still has not explained why. And when investigators seized Annie's Honda CRV, they were not just looking for fingerprints or a stray hair. They were after something far more powerful, data that could confirm or destroy the account Annie and Tommaso gave about what happened on the night of January 3rd. Every Honda CRV manufactured after 2015 contains what is called a telematics control unit. This is a computer module embedded in the vehicle's systems, typically located beneath the dashboard, that functions as a continuous black box recording the behavior of the car in extraordinary detail. The GPS system logs the vehicle's precise location at regular intervals throughout every trip. not just where the car started and where it ended. Every point along the route, every turn, every stop, timestamped. The door event system records which door opened and which door closed and at exactly what time. Front driver door, front passenger door, rear left, rear right, trunk, every opening, every closing. Every time a door was opened while the car was parked versus while it was in motion, all of it recorded. All of it timestamped. The seat weight sensors built into every seat for airbag deployment calculations record how much weight occupied each seat and for how long. These sensors are sophisticated enough to distinguish between a child, an adult, and an empty seat. They are sensitive enough to record whether weight was present continuously through a trip or appeared partway through. They do not lie. They do not misremember. They recorded what happened in that car on the night of January 31st, in a format that cannot be revised after the fact. The Bluetooth pairing log keeps a record of every device that connected to the car's audio and communication system. Device names, connection times, duration. If Nancy Guthrie's phone paired with the car that evening, the car remembers. If anyone else's phone connected at any point before or after the dinner, the car remembers that too. And here is what all of that means in practical terms. Investigators can reconstruct the entire evening using the car's own records. They can see exactly where the car went after leaving Annie and Tommaso's home. They can see if it drove directly to Nancy's house, as stated, or if it made stops that were not mentioned. They can see how long the car remained parked at Nancy's address. They can see where it went after it left. They can compare the weight sensor data against Annie's account of who sat where. If Nancy sat in the front passenger seat from dinner to her home, that seat sensor data should show an elderly woman's weight for the duration of that specific trip. If the sensor shows the seat was empty during that trip, or occupied by someone with a significantly different weight profile, that is a discrepancy. Not proof of anything, but a discrepancy that requires explanation. They can look at the door event log and verify that the front passenger door opened at Nancy's address at the time the family says they helped her out of the car. If the door events do not align with the stated account, investigators need to understand why. They can check the Bluetooth log for every device that was in or near that vehicle. If an unknown device connected to the car's system at any point, before or after the dinner, at any location, that is a lead. Every piece of that data can then be cross-referenced against cell tower records, surveillance footage from the neighborhood, the GPS data from Nancy's iPhone, and any other evidence investigators have collected from the scene. Former FBI Supervisory Special Agent John Lamb spent more than 3 decades working major cases. He described telematics analysis as one of the most significant developments in criminal investigation of the last 2 decades. He said, "The car is often the most honest witness in a case. People make mistakes when they talk to investigators. They misremember, they omit things. They say 15 minutes when it was 30. They say they drove straight there when they actually stopped somewhere. The car does not do any of that. The car tells you exactly what happened." But here is the part that explains why this analysis takes so long. Extracting telematics data is not a matter of plugging in a device and downloading a file. The telematics control unit has to be physically removed from the vehicle. A forensic copy, a bit-for-bit image of everything stored in the module, has to be created before anyone touches the data, to ensure nothing is altered or lost. Specialists in automotive forensics then work from that copy. They analyze the data. They convert raw system logs into readable formats. They compare timestamps. They build the timeline. That process, done properly, takes weeks. And if any of that data raises questions, if any timestamp does not match the account, if any sensor record is inconsistent with what was described, investigators do not rush to a conclusion. They take the discrepant data and compare it against every other piece of evidence in the investigation. Cell records, surveillance, witness accounts, phone data. Reconciling a discrepancy takes more weeks. This is not investigators dragging their feet. This is investigators doing their job correctly. Because if they rush, if they make an assumption based on incomplete analysis, and that assumption turns out to be wrong, they may lose the case entirely. 57 days is what doing this correctly looks like. But telematics is only part of what investigators were after. While one team worked the car's computer systems, another team processed the vehicle as a physical crime scene. They photographed every interior surface before anything was touched, documented every stain, every scratch, every item visible inside. Then began methodical collection. Every surface a human hand might touch was swabbed for DNA. Steering wheel, gearshift, door handles on all 4 doors, interior and exterior, seatbelt buckles, the rearview mirror, the dashboard. Skin cells and sweat are left behind on every surface we touch, and those cells contain DNA that can be extracted, profiled, and identified. The carpets and floor mats were vacuumed with forensic-grade equipment. Every fiber, every hair, every particle of debris collected, bagged, labeled. Fibers can identify fabric from specific clothing items. Hair can provide DNA. Debris can indicate where a person or object has been. The seats were examined with alternative light sources, ultraviolet and other wavelengths that make biological fluids visible that cannot be seen under normal lighting. Seat covers were removed to examine the padding beneath, the gaps between seat cushions, the spaces behind seat backs, the areas beneath the seats, all examined. The trunk received particular attention. In cases where an individual is transported against their will, the trunk is the primary location of interest. Investigators would have tested every surface of that trunk space for blood, using luminol, which reacts with even microscopic amounts of blood residue, and for DNA. They would have looked for hair, for fibers inconsistent with the vehicle's normal use. For any indication that a person had been placed in that space, they also would have looked for evidence of cleaning. Because here is something investigators understand that most people do not. When someone does something wrong using a vehicle, their instinct is often to clean, to shampoo the seats, to scrub the trunk, to wipe down surfaces with disinfectant, to remove whatever was there. But forensic science is better than cleaning. Chemical analysis can detect the presence of disinfectants, bleach, and enzymatic cleaners even after they have dried. It can determine approximately when cleaning occurred. It can identify the specific products used, and biological analysis can often recover DNA and blood evidence from surfaces that were cleaned, particularly if the cleaning was rushed or not completely thorough. If investigators found evidence that the car was aggressively cleaned between January 31st and February 3rd in areas that do not receive routine cleaning, like the trunk liner or the rear floor, that becomes a critical finding. Not because cleaning alone is proof of anything, but because it raises the question, what was someone trying to remove? Former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell was explicit on this point when she spoke with Chris McDaniel's panel. She said, "You do not shampoo your car's trunk because you spilled coffee. You shampoo your car's trunk because something happened in it that you do not want anyone to find. And when we see evidence of cleaning in unusual locations, we go looking harder for whatever was being cleaned up." DNA results take weeks. Environmental chemistry results take weeks. If samples were collected in the first week of February, results would have been arriving back in late February and into March. If any of those results showed unexpected findings, DNA from an unknown individual, blood from an unexpected source, cleaning in locations inconsistent with routine vehicle maintenance, investigators would need additional time to understand what they were looking at. That is the reality behind 57 days. Not delay, not incompetence, not indifference. 57 days of waiting for the science to come back, and then possibly waiting for the science to be confirmed. On February 20th, 2026, Sheriff Chris Nano stood in front of cameras and made a statement that reverberated through the national media and the Guthrie family's supporters. "We have cleared the Guthrie family. They are not suspects. They are not persons of interest. They are victims in this case. And I am asking the public and the media to respect their privacy and leave them alone." He said it again on February 22nd, and again on February 25th, when a reporter asked him directly whether Annie and Tommaso remained under any form of investigative scrutiny. "No, they are cleared. They had nothing to do with Nancy's disappearance." Now hold that statement in your mind while I tell you what was happening on the same days that Sheriff was making those public declarations. Annie and Tommaso's blue Honda CRV was sitting in a Pima County evidence facility with an official evidence number attached to it. Forensic technicians were processing its interior surfaces for biological evidence. Specialists were extracting or analyzing data from its telematics control unit. Lab samples were in transit or under analysis. The car had not been released, was not being released, was not scheduled for release. Both of those things were happening simultaneously. The sheriff telling the world the family was cleared, and investigators continuing to hold and analyze the family's car as evidence in an active kidnapping investigation. These two facts cannot coexist without explanation. Retired police officer Bob Gilliam spent 36 years in law enforcement, including extensive time as a detective working major cases and as an undersheriff overseeing department operations. He did not mince words when this contradiction was raised on McDaniel's panel. He said, "I have worked hundreds of cases. I have cleared suspects. I have made public statements about the status of investigations. And I can tell you, from experience, that you do not clear someone and simultaneously hold their property as evidence in that same investigation. Those two things do not go together. Either the family is cleared and the car should be returned, or the investigation is ongoing and you should not be telling the public they are cleared. I don't know how you do both at the same time and expect anyone to take it seriously." That is a 36-year law enforcement veteran saying clearly, something in this public narrative does not add up. And then Gilliam raised the possibility that the clearing was not based on evidence, that it was based on pressure. Consider what was happening to Annie and Tommaso in the weeks following Nancy's disappearance. Online communities had identified them as the last people to see Nancy alive and were treating that fact as evidence of guilt. Social media posts accused them directly. Podcasters dissected their every statement and appearance. The scrutiny was relentless. It was unrelenting. And it was, as many observers noted, potentially harmful, not just to the family, but to the investigation itself. Public accusation without evidence poisons the well. It makes witnesses reluctant to come forward. It makes investigators' jobs harder. If the sheriff came forward on February 20th and said the family is cleared, perhaps he was trying to redirect that pressure, to give Annie and Tommaso some breathing room, to refocus public attention on finding the actual perpetrator rather than speculating about people who may be entirely innocent. That is a defensible goal. But if that is what happened, it creates a different and more serious problem, because now the public has been told, definitively, that the family is not involved. And behind the scenes, the investigation into the family's vehicle continues. Lab results are still pending. Telematics analysis is still being completed. Evidence is still being evaluated. The public clearing and the private investigation are running on parallel tracks. And the people who know both tracks exist are not connecting them publicly. Former FBI Supervisory Special Agent John Lamb made a point during the panel that deserves to be stated plainly. Only a prosecutor can truly clear someone, not a sheriff, not a police chief, not the director of the FBI. Clearing, in the legal and investigative sense, means a prosecutor has reviewed all available evidence, all of it, including lab results, telematics data, DNA profiles, everything, and has determined there is insufficient basis to charge that person with a crime. When law enforcement says cleared at a press conference, before all evidence has been analyzed, before all lab results have returned, before all investigative questions have been resolved, that statement is not a legal determination. It is a public relations decision. Lamb has seen cases where law enforcement publicly stated someone was cleared, only to arrest that person months later when new evidence emerged. When that happens, he said, it is a disaster. It damages the credibility of the entire investigation. It gives defense attorneys a gift they will use for as long as the case continues, and it raises questions about whether the investigators knew what they were doing in the first place. Attorney and former prosecutor Matt Murphy made the same point in a separate commentary on the case. You cannot clear someone until all evidence has been analyzed, until every investigative lead has been followed, until you are absolutely certain. If the sheriff cleared the Guthrie family on February 20th and investigators were still processing Annie's car on March 5th, and on March 29th, one of two things is true. The clearing was premature, based on incomplete information, made under public pressure before the science came back, or the car is being held for reasons unrelated to Annie and Tommaso's potential involvement, reasons the sheriff has chosen not to explain publicly. The first possibility means the clearing statement was honest but wrong. The second means it was strategic but misleading. Neither is comfortable, neither is what the public was told, and neither resolves the fundamental question: why is that car still there? In routine cases, vehicles seized as evidence are processed and returned within a week or two. Hit and run, minor assault, property crime. Investigators photograph the vehicle, collect obvious physical evidence, pull the relevant data, and return it. 2 weeks is generous for most cases. In complex cases, major homicides, kidnappings involving potential biological evidence, cases requiring specialized forensic analysis, vehicles are sometimes held for weeks to months. Processing takes time. Lab results take time. You do not release critical evidence before all analysis is complete. 57 days is not routine. It is not even complex boots. 57 days means one of the following is true. The lab results were delayed. Perhaps the FBI's forensic laboratory had a backlog. Perhaps specialized analysis, botanical evidence, rare DNA profiling, chemical composition testing required external contractors with longer time. Perhaps multiple rounds of testing were necessary to confirm a finding. The telematics analysis produced questions that required additional investigation. If the car's data showed a discrepancy with the stated account, a GPS timestamp that did not align, a door event that occurred at an unexpected time, a sensor reading inconsistent with what was described, investigators would need to run that discrepancy against every other piece of evidence before drawing any conclusions. That reconciliation process takes time. Evidence was found that pointed in an unexpected direction. If DNA from an unknown individual was recovered from the vehicle, particularly in the trunk or in locations inconsistent with routine use, investigators would need to run that profile through every available database, compare it against evidence collected at Nancy's home and elsewhere in the investigation, and determine whose DNA it is. That process, depending on the database and the quality of the sample, takes weeks, or the investigation is waiting for a single critical result that will determine the trajectory of everything that follows. One lab report, one database match, one confirmation that either validates or contradicts the current theory of the case. And until that result arrives, the car stays. Former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell addressed the repair shop detail specifically. When a source inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department told McDana the car was at a repair shop being reassembled, O'Connell was unambiguous about what that means. She said, "Reassembly is not the end of the investigation. It is a sign that the physical examination of the car is largely complete. Investigators have extracted what they needed. Samples have gone to the lab. Data has been pulled. Now they are putting the car back together, because at some point, if the results support it, the car will need to be returned to its owners in drivable condition. But the car is still in evidence. The chain of custody is still intact, and the decision about whether to release it has not been made. The reassembly is preparation for a possible release. It is not the release itself. O'Connell also raised a scenario that investigators working this case would understand well. In some cases, she said, a vehicle is held in evidence, not because it implicates the person it belongs to, but because it contains evidence related to an outside actor. Evidence that the perpetrator touched the car, that their DNA is in the vehicle, that their footprints are on the exterior, that trace material from wherever they came from or wherever they took the victim was transferred to the vehicle. In those cases, you hold the car not because the owner is suspect, but because the car is a crime scene that connects to the perpetrator. That possibility that the Honda CRV is being held because it contains evidence pointing to whoever took Nancy Guthrie, not because it implicates Annie or Tommaso, would explain how the sheriff's clearing statement and the continued retention of the vehicle could both be true. But if that is the explanation, the sheriff has not said it, and the silence around why has lasted 57 days. The first theory is a targeted kidnapping by an organized outside perpetrator with prior knowledge of Nancy Guthrie, her home, and her security systems. Under this theory, the masked individual who appeared on Nancy's porch at 2 in the morning was not a random actor. He had been there before, physically or through surveillance. He knew the location of the doorbell camera before he arrived, because he disabled it immediately, without searching for it or hesitating. He knew how to enter the home. He knew that Nancy lived alone. He had a plan, and he executed it with a precision that took 41 minutes. The evidence supporting this theory is the most visible evidence in the case: the disabled camera, the gloves, the covered face, the complete absence of audible struggle or noise that would draw a neighbor's attention. These are the behaviors of someone who prepared, not someone who acted impulsively. The level of organization displayed on that footage is consistent with either extensive prior surveillance of the property or access to detailed information about the home's layout and security. The critical gap in this theory is motive. Who targets an 84-year-old woman in the middle of the night and removes her without leaving a body? Financial motive, access to assets, control of an estate, is possible. Silencing motive, someone who feared what Nancy knew or might say, is possible. But neither has been publicly established, and without a suspect, motive remains theoretical. The second theory is that someone known to Nancy, someone in her personal orbit, or someone with access to information about her routine, was involved in planning or facilitating her disappearance. Under this theory, the operational knowledge displayed by the perpetrator did not come from surveillance. It came from familiarity, the immediate identification and disabling of the camera, the ease of entry, the ability to remove an 84-year-old woman with serious medical conditions without any audible struggle. These could indicate that Nancy knew the person who came to her door, or at minimum, trusted the situation enough not to react with the fear she would have shown toward a stranger. Alternatively, someone with knowledge of Nancy's home and schedule may have provided that information to the perpetrator, whether intentionally or inadvertently. The evidence that creates at least investigative questions in this direction includes the retention of the Honda CRV. If investigators believed this was entirely the work of an unknown outside actor, with zero connection to the family, would they need to hold the family's car for 57 days? The warrant established probable cause that the car contained evidence of the kidnapping. What evidence, specifically, investigators believed was in that car, and what they found has not been stated publicly. The critical gap here is the same as the gap in every theory: the absence of public evidence directly implicating anyone. A search warrant for a vehicle does not establish guilt. Investigators may have seized the car as a matter of standard investigative procedure and may still be holding it while awaiting lab results that will ultimately confirm the family's account. The third theory is a hybrid scenario in which an outside perpetrator had access to detailed information about Nancy's household through channels that felt innocent to the people who provided it. A conversation overheard, a routine observed over time, a comment made without awareness of who was listening. Under this theory, the people close to Nancy are not involved in what happened to her, but the perpetrator used information gathered from their environment to plan the operation. This theory would explain a cleared family and a retained vehicle simultaneously. The car might contain forensic evidence pointing toward the outside perpetrator: DNA, a Bluetooth device connection, trace material transferred from someone who had been in contact with the vehicle or its occupants. Evidence that can help identify who planned this, even if the family themselves had nothing to do with it. The evidence supports parts of each of these theories, and each leaves critical gaps that have not been publicly filled. What is not a theory is the warrant. What is not a theory is the 57-day retention. What is not a theory is the confidentiality agreement on the tow transport. What is not a theory is the source inside the sheriff's department confirming the car was still in evidence, still being analyzed, still tagged. Those are facts, and those facts, together, tell a story that the public has not fully heard. This is Dave. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for nearly 2 full months. She is 84 years old. She has a pacemaker. She has serious underlying medical conditions. Every day that passes without news reduces, statistically, the probability that she will be found alive. The investigators working this case know that they are operating with that weight on every decision they make. Here is what the investigation looks like as of today. The FBI is involved. Federal resources have been committed. That means access to the FBI's forensic laboratories, its database infrastructure, its investigative personnel, and its legal resources. Federal involvement also means a higher level of coordination and a longer institutional timeline. The FBI does not rush. It also does not stop. A combined reward of over $1.2 million is available for information leading to Nancy's recovery. That number is significant. It reflects both the seriousness of the case and the involvement of people with substantial resources. $1.2 million is enough to change someone's life. If someone saw something, if someone knows something, that reward is available right now. The blue Honda CRV belonging to Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Feliciano remains in law enforcement custody. As of the most recent confirmed reporting, the vehicle was at a repair facility being reassembled after forensic analysis. It has not been returned. It remains tagged as evidence with an official evidence number in the Nancy Guthrie kidnapping investigation. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has made no public statement explaining why the car has not been returned. Sheriff Chris Nanos has not addressed the contradiction between his public clearing of the family and the continued retention of their vehicle. The tow company that transported the vehicle is operating under a confidentiality agreement. None of this is normal for a family that has been publicly cleared. Every investigator who has examined the public record of this case arrives at the same conclusion. Something significant is being waited on. Something that will either confirm or redirect the current theory of what happened. And until that something arrives, the car stays in custody. The sheriff stays silent, and Nancy Guthrie stays missing. Forensic psychologist Dr. Gary Picado made an observation on the panel that has stayed with me. He said, "The length of time a vehicle is held in evidence tells you something about the investigators, not just the case. Investigators who hold a vehicle for 2 months are investigators who believe that vehicle matters. They are not holding it out of habit or bureaucracy. They are holding it because somewhere in that car is something they need to understand before they can move forward, and they are not moving forward until they understand it." 57 days is investigators saying, "This matters. This car matters. What it contains matters. And we are not done with it yet." That is not nothing. That is the most honest statement this investigation has made. We do not know what the telematics data showed, whether the GPS log confirmed or contradicted the family's account of the evening, whether the door event timestamps matched what Annie and Tommaso described, whether the seat weight sensors recorded what was expected or something that required explanation. We do not know what the biological evidence analysis showed, whether DNA from the vehicle matched only the expected occupants or included profiles from individuals who should not have been in that car, whether any blood evidence was found, whether there was any indication of cleaning in unusual locations. We do not know what lab results are still pending, if any, whether the 57-day timeline reflects a completed analysis that investigators are waiting to act on, or an ongoing analysis that has not yet concluded. We do not know what the warrant affidavit said, what specific facts investigators presented to the judge to establish probable cause, what they believed was in that car, and why. We do not know any of this because we have not been told, and we have not been told because investigators are not obligated to tell us. Active investigations are not public proceedings. Evidence in a criminal case is not subject to public disclosure until charges are filed or a trial begins. But here is what we do know. We know a judge agreed there was probable cause to believe that car contained evidence of a crime. We know investigators have held it for 57 days. We know the car was disassembled and analyzed and is now being reassembled under law enforcement supervision. We know the tow company is under a confidentiality agreement. We know the sheriff publicly cleared the family while all of this was happening. We know the sheriff has not explained the contradiction, and we know that Nancy Guthrie, a real person, a mother, a grandmother, an 84-year-old woman who went to her daughter's house for dinner on a Friday night, has not been found. Those things, together, are a picture, not a complete picture. There are pieces missing. There will be pieces missing until this case is resolved. But it is enough of a picture to say clearly, this investigation is not where the public has been told it is. The car that has not come home is the proof of that. In cases like this, in cases that involve prominent families and national media attention and social media speculation, there is a constant risk that the investigation becomes about the narrative rather than the evidence. That what gets reported, what gets amplified, what gets treated as true becomes a function of what the most vocal voices are saying rather than what the facts actually support. This channel does not operate that way. Nothing stated tonight constitutes an accusation against any member of the Guthrie family. A search warrant is not evidence of guilt. 57 days of vehicle retention is not evidence of guilt. A contradiction between a public clearing statement and the status of ongoing forensic analysis is evidence of a contradiction, and nothing more. The only accusation that belongs in this case is the accusation against whoever took Nancy Guthrie from her home in the middle of the night. Whoever that is, known or unknown, connected or unconnected to the family, they are the person who belongs in a courtroom. Everything else is investigation. Everything else is the process of following evidence wherever it leads, without predetermined conclusions, without public pressure shaping the analysis, without the narrative getting ahead of the facts. That is what this case deserves. That is what Nancy Guthrie deserves. An investigation that follows the evidence wherever it leads. A public record that is honest about what is known and what is not, and accountability from the people in positions of authority who have made statements that contradict the physical reality of this investigation. The sheriff cleared the family. The car is still in evidence. Both of those things are true, and until someone explains how they can both be true at the same time, the most important question in the Nancy Guthrie case remains unanswered. Not who took her. That question matters most. That question drives the investigation. But right behind it, in terms of what the public needs to understand, is this one. Why won't the sheriff tell us what they found in that car? 57 days. And counting. Somewhere out there, someone knows something. And that reward exists because finding Nancy Guthrie is worth more than any number on a check. This is not just a story. It is a real life, a real family, and a case that may still have answers waiting to be found. The search for truth continues. The 41 minutes. Everyone focuses on the masked man, the disabled camera, the gloves, the entry, and those things are important. But the number that should be keeping investigators up at night is 41 minutes. 41 minutes is how long it took from the moment that masked individual entered Nancy Guthrie's home to the moment her pacemaker stopped syncing. Think about what 41 minutes means for a 4-year-old woman with limited mobility and serious medical conditions. It means she did not fight her way out. She could not. The physical reality of her age and her health made that impossible. It means she could not have simply run, could not have hidden effectively, could not have barricaded a door or reached a phone and dialed emergency services in time to matter. 41 minutes means this perpetrator had a plan for managing her, a method for keeping her controlled and quiet in a way that did not produce the kind of noise or struggle that would alert neighbors. In a residential neighborhood, in the middle of the night. What does that tell us? It tells us this was not chaotic. It was not improvised. It was not someone who broke in looking for something and panicked when they found a person. This was someone who came to that house specifically for Nancy Guthrie, who had a method ready, who executed a plan that they had thought through in advance, who knew what they were doing and did it in 41 minutes without leaving an audible trace. The level of operational control that represents is chilling, and it raises a question that forensic psychologists who study predatory crime take very seriously. How does someone develop that level of operational confidence toward a specific target? The answer, in case after case, is practice or proximity. Either this individual has done something similar before, which means there may be a pattern that connects this crime to others, or they develop their confidence through extended, intimate familiarity with this specific target. Her routine, her home, her vulnerabilities, her trust. Neither answer is comfortable. Both answers point investigators toward specific investigative directions. If this person has done this before, there should be a pattern. Similar disappearances. Similar methods. A forensic profile that connects disparate cases through shared behavioral signatures. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit has the tools and the experience to look for that pattern. If this person developed their confidence through familiarity with Nancy specifically, it means someone in or adjacent to Nancy's life either is the perpetrator or provided the perpetrator with the information they needed. It means the answer to what happened to Nancy Guthrie may be closer to home than the narrative of an unknown outside predator suggests. The 41 minutes point in a direction. Investigators know which direction. The car may contain evidence that confirms or redirects that direction. And until the car comes home, the direction stays private. 4.5 hours. That is the gap between the time Annie and Tommaso say they dropped Nancy off at her home and the time the masked figure appeared on her porch, from approximately 10 in the evening to 2 in the morning. 4.5 hours. If someone was watching Nancy's home, waiting for her to return, 4.5 hours is a long time to wait in a residential neighborhood without being noticed. Long enough that neighbors going to bed, dogs being walked, cars pulling in and out of driveways might have registered an unfamiliar vehicle or an unfamiliar presence. Investigators would have canvassed that neighborhood extensively, would have asked every neighbor within sightlines of Nancy's home whether they saw anything unusual that evening, whether any vehicles were parked on the street that did not belong there, whether anyone was walking or standing in the area after dark, whether anyone saw anything. If no unusual presence was reported by any neighbor during those 4.5 hours, it suggests one of two things. Either the perpetrator was not watching from the street, they were watching from somewhere or through some means that did not put them in the neighborhood physically. Surveillance cameras accessible remotely, A real-time location shared through a device. Information received through a communication that told them when Nancy arrived home. Or the perpetrator did not need to watch. They already knew when Nancy would be home because they already knew where she had been and when she was leaving. That second possibility is what investigators call operational knowledge. Knowledge that could only come from someone who knew Nancy's schedule, who knew she had been at dinner, who knew approximately when she would be returned home, who knew the window during which the house would be unoccupied after Annie and Tommaso dropped her off, and before Nancy had a chance to settle in, check the doors, and go to sleep. 41 minutes is a tight, controlled operation. 4.5 hours is a window that someone knew about. Those two facts, together, suggest a level of advanced knowledge about Nancy Guthrie's movements on the night of January 31st that goes beyond casual observation. And the blue Honda CRV, the vehicle that carried Nancy home that night, is the vehicle that law enforcement seized 2 days later, under a warrant establishing probable cause that it contained evidence of her kidnapping. These facts are related. How they are related is what 57 days of forensic analysis is working to establish. She was 84 years old. She wore a pacemaker. She had conditions that required monitoring, medication, and consistent medical attention. The pacemaker stopped transmitting at 2:41 in the morning on February 1st. That does not mean Nancy died at that moment. Pacemakers can stop transmitting for reasons other than death. The device can go out of range. The battery can be affected by interference. The pairing with the iPhone can be disrupted. But it is also true that for an 84-year-old woman with serious cardiac needs being removed from her home by force in the middle of the night, the stress on her system would have been extreme. The physical handling alone, the fear, the cold night air, the loss of her normal environment, her medications, her routine. Every hour that passed after 2:41 in the morning on February 1st represented a medical risk that compounds over time. Investigators know this. The FBI knows this. The Pima County Sheriff's Department knows this, which means the urgency of this investigation is not just about justice. It is about the possibility that Nancy Guthrie is still alive somewhere. Somewhere that her captors have managed to keep her alive for 57 days, but somewhere that she needs help immediately. $1.2 million for information leading to her safe recovery. That word, safe, it is still there. It is still the operative word. It means the people offering that reward still believe there is a possibility Nancy can be brought home alive. 57 days is a long time, but people have been found after longer, and the car that has not come home might be the key to finding her. Investigations are confidential for good reasons. Evidence cannot be disclosed prematurely without compromising the case. Suspects cannot be publicly named without sufficient basis. Information that would alert a perpetrator to the direction of the investigation has to be protected. These are legitimate reasons for investigators to stay quiet about the details of what they have found and what they are looking for. But there is a difference between operational silence, protecting the direction of the protecting investigation, and institutional silence about a public contradiction that the community deserves to understand. The sheriff told the public 3 times that the Guthrie family is cleared. The sheriff's own department is holding the family's car as evidence. 57 days later, with a confidentiality agreement around its transport and an active evidence number on its file. Those 2 things are not operational intelligence. They are not secret details that would compromise the investigation. The fact that the family has been publicly cleared is already public. The fact that the car is an evidence confirmed by a source inside the department itself is already known. What is not known is how those 2 facts can both be true. And that question, not the specific forensic findings, not the content of the warrant affidavit, not the lab results, just that question, the basic question of how those 2 things can coexist. That is something the sheriff could answer without compromising a single investigative detail. He has chosen not to. For 57 days, he has chosen not to. That choice is a decision, and decisions in investigations always have reasons behind them. What the reason is, we do not know, but we know the silence is not accidental, and we know Nancy Guthrie is still out there somewhere, and we know that somewhere, in a repair shop or a lab or a file folder in a sheriff's department, there may be an answer that changes everything. The question is when that answer becomes public, and whether, when it does, it is not too late.